Hello.
Hello, Prof. Tandia.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Yourself?
Good, good. Good morning from Montreal. It's only 8:30 here.
Oh, great. All right.
That's right.
And our side
Okay.
is afternoon.
That's right. So do I begin or do I wait for you to do something about it?
Oh, please, the chair just starts. I don't think we have anything to say.
All right then.
We don't need so much fanfare.
Fanfare, very good, interesting. Well, I just want to welcome all the attendants to this particular session on the third day of the conference. It looks like a very exciting and promising series of presentations. We've got three main presentations to do, and I'm so very much looking forward to it. And I'm very happy that you've all joined us to listen to these, good scholars and hear what they've got to tell us. And I'm looking forward to a very exciting presentation, as I said earlier. We're going to begin with the very first presentation. That will be by Zeni Jansen van Vuren of the University of the Free State. She's a lecturer at the University of the Free State, and her research interests include simultaneous interpreting, community interpreting, non-professional interpreting, semiotics, and post-humanist history. What I find particularly exciting in her career is, or her path, is this idea of combining her interest in photography and her academic interests in semiotics, specifically eco-semiotics, and which she investigates the way in which nature is represented and symbolized in culture. She will be talking to us today about non-linguistic science as communicative basis for non-professional interpreting. So without much ado, for the interest of time, I will cede the floor to Ms. Zeni Jansen van Vuren. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. I'm sorry about the cat in the background. I didn't know he was in the room. And let me just share my screen quickly, which was here a while ago. Sorry about that. Oh, there we go. There we go. All right. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Thank you for listening to me. I'm just going to jump right in. So animal welfare work in South Africa is a diverse phenomenon that takes place in a variety of contexts and situations. Examples of which are the widely known SPCA, a formalized NGO and NPO with legal authority to confiscate abused and neglected animals, or on the other side, animal welfare trusts and NPOs with no legal authority to confiscate any animals. However, the latter's aims are often to assist animal owners in caring for animals through education, providing food or shelter or free medical care. This paper, which forms part of my larger PhD study, which I also hope to complete by the end of this year, focuses on the second group of welfare workers, in particular, a welfare trust that specifically works with cart horses in Tabanshu, a rural town in the Free State, South Africa. This organization does bi-weekly outreach events where cart horses are brought for medical assessment and care, for vaccinations, for food collection. During these events, welfare workers, veterinarians, horse owners, horses, and community members communicate with one another verbally and non-verbally. Non-professional interpreters often interpret between animal owners and welfare workers who do not speak the same language. However, the observation and interpretation of physical symptoms of injuries and other non-linguistic signs produced by humans and non-humans is equally essential for this communication process to take place. Against this background, this paper will attempt to do two things. provide a theoretical foundation for the study of human and non-human and verbal and non-verbal translation. And secondly, to show a very short example of my data of non-human human translation processes. Before we continue, I just need to clarify some terms that I'm using in this paper. Non-professional interpreting is basically community interpreting, where individuals who are not employed as interpreters nor have interpreting training perform the act of interpreting. In the case of this study, non-professional interpreting or non-professional interpreters include welfare workers, volunteers, veterinarians, horse owners, and community members, and probably even horses. Their involvement as non-professional interpreters is sporadic and often depends on their physical proximity to a particular interaction where interpreting is needed, where they will either notice the need for interpreting and interpret out of their own accord, or be asked based on knowledge of their ability to interpret certain situations. Translation, as I use it in this context, refers to both translation and interpreting. So it's more the umbrella term of the process of translation that takes place. So you might notice me using translation and interpreting interchangeably. So the photo in front of you is basically the context where I did my research. It's a town square on the outskirts of Tabanshu. This was in the winter, so you can see the long shadows of the midday. Right, so basically my talk will range from kind of situating translation and semiotics within the animal turn very briefly, and then go on to explain what is meant by the sign and semiosis, and from there link semiosis and translation all the way through. You can read it there, and then all of this leading up to the data that I want to present. So at the beginning of the 21st century, Claudia Anginelli argued for an opening up of translation studies to other fields of study by stating that failing to incorporate related theories from fields such as linguistic anthropology, bilingualism, feminism, sociolinguistics, social psychology, sociology, or translation studies, prior work in the field of interpreting has created a closed circle. And we can see that recent interpreting and translation research have incorporated other fields of study, especially since then. However, while the interdisciplinary characteristic of interpreting studies enables us to understand and explain the field of interpreting as more than a mere linguistic act, framing interpreting studies within a broader sociocultural understanding still approaches interpreting as a mere social anthropocentric act. While it can't be ignored that interpreting is indeed a social act, the social is only part of a much larger encompassing process. So by taking into consideration the recent animal turn, which basically in short refers to multidisciplinary scholarly interest in the relationship between humans and animals, or humans and non-humans, within the Anthropocene. In fields such as humanities, law, social sciences, and critical studies, I'm proposing that translation and interpreting studies should start to look at human and non-human communication as well. How? Well, through semiosis is the short answer, and what follows in this paper is the long answer. Before we delve into this whole topic, I think it's necessary to discuss what is meant by the sign and semiosis. I will use the definition of sign by Charles Peirce, one of the fathers of semiotics, who said that a sign is something which stands to somebody for something in some respect or capacity. It always consists of three elements: a representative, an object, and an interpretant. In this image, we have here the representative, the meaning carrier, is the word horse, for instance. The object is that to which the word horse refers to, so in this case, an actual horse. And then the interpretant is what the horse means to someone making meaning from the sign, which would either be a pet or a tool or even food. Semiosis is the process of the sign meaning something to someone or something. It is a triadic relationship between the aforementioned object, interpretant, and representment. However, semiosis should not be regarded as a purely human phenomenon. In fact, semiosis occurs in all living things, all the extensions of living things. It is the capacity of a species to produce and comprehend the environment, and to make sense of the environment. What is of particular relevance here is during the process of semiosis, each of these elements can become any of the other elements. Simply put, the representament can become the object, which can become the interpretant, and so forth. Floyd Merrill uses an analogy of smoke, which signifies fire, and I feel I need to read it here. Hopefully it won't take away much of my time. So a forest ranger spies the sign. Immediately a semiotic object, fire, comes to mind. Then there is an interpretant that mediates and brings the representament and semiotic object together to create the concept of a dangerous situation and demands immediate action. The semiotic object suddenly becomes the representament, whose semiotic object points towards the physical destruction that the flames are wreaking on the natural habitat. An interpretant tells the ranger that the condition is severe. The apparent, I'm sorry about the screaming bird in the background. I actually got a babysitter, which is not doing its job, it seems. The apparent danger from her original interpretant now becomes a representament that provokes its own semiotic object involving a nearby campground. So, in short, signs become signs, which in turn give way to more signs. We have seen a significant increase in studies referring to translation and semiosis as corresponding processes, and we can see this in studies from Petrilli, Marais, Kalivikul, Michael Cronin, amongst many others. Susan Petrilli, for instance, posits that the question of translation can't be limited to the question of the relation among different historical natural languages. And she goes on to say that translation involves the process of semiosis, and if something is a sign, it's because it can be translated. And importantly, the meaning of the sign is not inside the sign, but in another sign. And as Peirce indicated, a meaning is in its primary acceptation, the translation of a sign into another system of signs. A lot of the word signs there. So by taking all of this into consideration, I intend to show that this can be done in practice. So perhaps one of the most substantial groundwork for expanding the view of translation as a mere verbal action has been the interest in intersemiotic translation, a concept which stems from the classification of the 3 translation processes by Roman Jakobsen. I'm sure all of you know this. I'm not going to go into too much detail and just quickly discuss the intersemiotic translation, which is according to him, an interpretation of verbal signs by means of signs of non-verbal sign systems. This view of intersemiotic translation has, since then, undergone some reevaluation and has ultimately led to the shedding of the linguistic bias. Intersemiotic translation is, at its most basic level, regarded as a process of transference of properties among media. While not really referred to as thus, intersemiotic translation during the process of interpreting occurs regularly. For instance, the interpretation, and I'm referring here to the notion of making sense of facial expressions, body language, and cultural nuances of interlocutors by the interpreter could be regarded as intersemiotic translation. So with regards to translation processes between humans and non-humans, fields such as biotranslation, eco-translation, biosemiotics, and ecosemiotics are providing insight into human-animal and animal-animal communication and translation. Outside of these fields, few scholars have delved into the translation between humans and animals. One of these is Temple Grandin, who draws on fields such as biology and psychology to make her argument for translation between humans and animals. Her view of the translator is not one of neutral conveyor of a message, but rather as a partner in the communication process. Conversely, animals can act as a translator. There are many examples that we can mention here. One is the relationship of a seeing eye dog and its human. The relationship between the two, as Magnus says, relies on the perception, cognition, and communicative abilities of a non-human being on behalf of a human being. And I was reminded yesterday of another great example, the bomb-sniffing rats in some countries who sniff out the presence of landmines that act as translators. A recent series of publications by Marais on the expansion of translation to include non-linguistic aspects and non-human animals is a case in point for this study as well. In a recent paper, Marais argued that apart from Tom, Dick, and Harry, Fido and Puss in Boots also communicate, but so do bacteria, cells, plants, and all animals. By broadening our approach to translation studies, we could move in a direction of understanding the non-human other. By including animals in translation studies, Marais argues it could broaden our view of animals since translation studies is ultimately based on mediating difference. Marais says that, it's in the second quote there, in a post-humanist paradigm of thinking, where humans are no longer regarded as the center of either the universe or Earth, it is crucial that a theory of translation is able to explain not only human semiosis, but also non-human semiosis. And if we argue that semiosis is, in essence, translation, then translation takes place on non-human level as well. Now that we know what semiosis is and how semiosis and translation and interpreting fit together, narrowing it down to ecosemiotics is the next step. So ecosemiotics is a branch of semiotics that developed in the early 1990s to explore semiotic or sign-mediated aspects of ecology, as Timo Moran said. It includes the exploration into relations between human culture and the environment, and allows for human attitudes towards animals to be discussed in a semiotic or from a semiotic perspective. It is often linked to the study of the human in the Anthropocene by extending the range of the sign as a central concept of semiotics from human culture to non-humans and the ecology. The role of an ecosemiotic approach would be to connect, to mediate, and to translate different sign systems and structural levels of semiotic systems in nature-culture relations from both human and non-human sign systems. And I want to refer here to Rister Keskpike, who summarized the most important task of ecosemiotics, which is to help diminish communication problems between nature and culture. Ultimately then, an ecosemiotic study regards the human and the non-human sign systems as equally important. It also, furthermore, involves equal status recognition of various Umwelten. The premise of the Umwelt theory holds that organisms are subjects and not objects in a particular ecology, and that they experience the world based on their own species-specific biological modeling devices, such as their senses, thus creating their own subjective experiential world through the process of semiosis. An Umwelt is, as Khalid Kul explained at the very last bullet point there, the semiotic world of an organism. It unites all the semiotic processes of an organism into a whole. It's the subjective, meaningful world of any particular species of organisms. So when it comes to human and non-human communication or miscommunication, Saslow said that when we interpret the actions of our companion animals, we are prone to attribute behavioral shortcomings or peculiarities to lack of intelligence or deficient obedience on the one hand, or animal extrasensory perception, ESP, on the other. But often the best explanation is a mere mismatch of umwelts. Therefore, in studying cultural representations of animals, we should also be aware that our perception and understanding of animals is biased by our own umwelt structure, and that many features, forms of communication, modalities, and even entire species are often underrepresented because they are not present in our own umwelt. Since the communication at animal welfare outreaches takes place on multiple levels between animal owner, animal and welfare worker and owner, etc., the variety of science and science systems is vast. The role of the interpreter from an ecosemiotic perspective is then to not merely convey the verbal message, but also equally importantly, to convey the non-verbal signs. In doing so, it allows us to understand, or at least try to understand, the umwelten of other organisms. With regards to the translation between human and horse umwelten, ecologically, a horse is traditionally a prey animal. As a result, their umwelt is focused on avoiding prey and searching for grazing. Based on their need to survive as a prey animal, their strongest senses are their sense of smell and of hearing. While humans have a very superficial olfactory ability, horses are able to smell a wide variety of experiences, including emotions, sexuality, enemies, and places. The eyesight of horses is very different to that of humans. Horses' vision have primarily evolved, as with other prey animals, for the detection of predator approach from any angle, rather than accurate visual identification of stationary objects. And therefore, it is assumed that horses primarily rely on other senses to make sense of their environment. And in horse-human relations, such as instances where a horse is pulling a cart or being ridden, for example, the horse is much more dependent on the human's eyesight than humans think. Humans very strongly rely on their sight, as with most primates, as their main sensory input. They are very heavily dependent on their excellent high acuity daytime vision for distance information, object recognition, and sexual attraction, kin and friend identification, and non-verbal communication of emotion, and are often unaware that our other mammals, such as horses, rely on other senses as smell and hearing for survival. So to summarize, I am trying to look at various actors as actively involved in translating processes between one another, within themselves, and of the ecology. My data analysis consisted of two phases, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is a semiotic analysis of recordings of 5 interactions involving both human and non-human participants at the animal welfare outreach events. And phase 2 is the identification of themes through coding of the qualitative data through the coding program ATLAS TI. For today, I will only and briefly provide an excerpt from phase 1. So, as I just said, this phase included the analysis of semiotic or semiosic processes or translations, to quote the scholars in the first part of my paper, that occurred as a result of interaction between the participants, both human and non-human participants. I identified 5 interactions with different forms of semiosis occurring between the interactors, of which only one will be discussed today, and also very briefly. The one I'm discussing today is the translation of pain, where the horse is the initial meaning maker whose actions are translated by the welfare worker to the horse owner. It's important to note that there are countless, in any situation, countless semiosic processes at play. I chose to focus on the ones which I could observe. So the visual and the oral interactions of the participants in a particular context, and also only focus on the participants that were directly involved in the interaction. So not those on the periphery, such as onlookers or passers-by. So for lack of time, I'm not showing the video. I'm showing screenshots of the beginning, the middle, and the end of the process of this interaction. This image that we are looking at now is a horse with a saddle sore, which is an injury as a result of an ill-fitting saddle. If you look carefully, you can see the blue on the mark from an antiseptic spray. So the horse with a saddle sore moves backwards, the ears are pulled back, and it pulls at the reins when humans, which is the horse owner and the horse physiotherapist, try to approach it. So moving backwards in this instance, pulling at the reins, is the representment. The object would then be fear. It points to fear, and the interpretant would be the humans backing off from this. So a subsequent interaction between image 1 and 2, well, it's between image 1 and 2, but it's visible in the recording. It's not visible here. Of back and forth occurs where the horse starts to relax, and you can see the ears and the eyes starting to relax. Then the humans move forward and the horse tenses up again. So this happens quite a bit. And in this part of the recording as well, the verbal translation occurs where the welfare worker tells the participants that the horse is acting this way because it is in pain and doesn't need to be touched or doesn't want to be touched. Image 2, then you can immediately see the ears. I just want to point back to those ears, and then if you look back there, the horse owner and the physiotherapist are closer to the horse, so the human presence is the representment. The lack of danger in this instance is the object, and her ears are not pulled back, but instead show interest. One is pointing forward and one towards the physiotherapist. So referring to the acute hearing of horses. And the reaction of the horse to the presence of the humans is the interpretant. And this then becomes the following representment and infinitum. Image 3, I'll be very brief. I'm sure I'm over my time already. Not yet. The humans are touching the horse. The horse is more calm. The physiotherapist can touch the horse, and yeah, the representment I see as physical touch. The object is the human is not hurting the horse, and an interpretant is once again the horse relaxing even more. So I'm just going to show an excerpt of the semiotic or semiosis, the triadic compilation that I tried to do. I tried to frame the semiotic flow as moving from humans to horse to humans to horse. What we can see here then is that the interpretant of the first triad becomes the representment of the second triad, and so continuing, so referring back to what Floyd Merrill said, a sign is a sign of a sign of a sign of a sign. What we can then see is that participants are participating on different levels in the meaning-making process in which the translation of Umwelten occurs. Translation processes occur both verbally and non-verbally, as well as intentionally and unintentionally. All actors and processes are interdependent and interactive and ultimately contribute to the transience of the process in the context. In this particular instance, the horse is an active participant in the communication process through non-verbal communication, which at times is interpreted by various actors, the welfare worker and the interpreter. There's a non-professional verbal interpreter who also interprets what the welfare worker says. Sorry, I forgot to say that earlier. And also the horse physiotherapist, and the horse owner. So there are many different levels of meaning taking place simultaneously on a macro, meso, and micro level. My analysis, and this example of an analysis is really, really a very small part of this. And ultimately we can clearly see how the elements change in their roles from object to sign to interpretant. And here is a nice example just showing how you can kind of see that the sign becomes a movable process, or that continuously changes in the role of the elements. And concluding, therefore, given the above mentioned background of semiotics and specifically eco-semiotics when aligned with translation, we can argue that the translational process and context can be broadened to include much more than mere conversion of one language into another, involving only human actors. Non-verbal communication is equally vital in the process, in both settings that involve human and animal, or human-animal and human-human interaction. And those that only have human, and those that only have human interaction, it becomes evident that a conceptualization of non-professional interpreting outside of the narrow linguistic framework is not only possible, but also necessary. Furthermore, by framing non-professional interpreting within an eco-semiotic approach, we can account for the relevance and importance of not only non-verbal communication, but also the non-human participants that participate in the interpreting process. Here we go. Just going to stop sharing.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this wonderful, very original presentation. I find it fascinating. We're going in many different directions in translation studies, and this is all for the good. I just love it. We all have interactions with animals, but we never really quite think of them in these terms. And I just find this particularly enriching and quite promising. I'm so happy also because you have respected the time so very well. It's amazing how well you've kept to the time. And
it took a while to practice.
It's amazing. You can see that. It's really quite to the point, actually. So I'll now open the floor to questions from our listeners. And please, if you would like to make a comment or ask a question, show of hand, and I will simply call you up. Yes, Peter.
I hope you can hear me now. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Because my microphone wasn't working yesterday, which is a pity because it was so interesting yesterday and today as well. Zany, thank you very much for that. It's amazing what you're doing. I think your research is really fantastic. And I had a question. You know, we use the term, well, what's his name? Harris calls, non-professional. We also calls them natural. It also calls it natural translation. And my question to you is about this sort of idea that people can, this is my question, can some people read horses better than others? If you see what I mean.
I think that has to do with in exactly the same way that some people have a better grasp of a different language than you would have of than someone else would have. And I think in this sense, if you have a better understanding of the horses, they might not even know it's an umwelt, but they might know horse body language, horse behavior. If I just by Googling, I had to, not much is done on horse umwelt and the two words together. So I had to have quite creative searches when I looked for credible research on this. And a lot is done on horse language, so to speak, which in essence is the umwelt. So they in short, yes, if you have a better knowledge than other people of horse umwelten, you would definitely be able to interpret a bit better. What I did find is that the welfare workers, the ones who kind of approach it with the work with more empathy, as opposed to the vets, for example, picked up on the behavioral cues, like ears pulling back or the frightened eyes, much better than the veterinarians who were a bit more clinical in their approach to reading the horses. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Yes, and just if I may, just a brief comment. I think what you're proposing here is a kind of like a democratic process in which humans have to recognize nature and animals as equal partners in communication, which is, you know, fantastic. I wish you every success with your research. Well done.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, it's amazing. Fantastic indeed. Any more questions or comments, please? I'm looking and I'm not seeing any hands up. As we wait for questions, you could also type in your comments or questions if you want to share them on the chat feature. But in the meantime, as we're waiting, I just want to say that when we got further into your presentation, you know, it reminded me of the fact that the whole concept of sign, you know, the thing about sign in translation or in language per se, which began with, to a certain extent, with St. Augustine, actually, when he was engaged in debates with the others, particularly St. Jerome, about the importance of sign and not, basically in a conservative fashion, not to misinterpret signs and all that stuff. And which finally culminated in the whole concept of the arbitrariness of sign. This was later taken up very seriously by Ferdinand de Saussure, as most of you know, and I think he's influenced quite a few researchers, including Peirce. This whole idea of the arbitrariness of sign, as you were talking, I was wondering, like, how does one factor in that particular aspect of language? I mean, Saussure had developed this into the concept of signified and signify and all that stuff. But again, in the interaction between humans and animals, how does one, you know, consider or factor in this whole aspect of arbitrariness of sign? This is just a kind of a theoretical question, just to see how, you know, give you an idea, but also to see how you would tackle this kind of issue in this kind of, you know, interaction between humans and animals.
Well, I think the easiest answer that I can give you is that Saussure was a linguist, so his focus was primarily on language, and language in itself is arbitrary. I mean, everything is learned and conventional, whereas Peirce, he expanded the notion of sign, and they actually worked concurrently, apparently without knowledge of one another, on two different continents. Peirce is an American, and he expanded the notion of sign to include more than the human, and from the beginning, and to include, or which then lay the foundation. And I think that kind of helps me in my study as well. I don't really have to think about Saussure and the problem of the arbitrariness of the sign, in the sense that that so much has been done based on Charles Peirce's view of the sign, and which has culminated into biosemiotics and ecosemiotics and all the ecology studies that kind of take that approach rather than the Saussure approach. I hope that answers the question to a certain extent.
Yes, indeed. It's just that I was also conceiving this from the point of view of us coming all the way from St. Augustine, which is mostly based on the senses, you know, sense of smell,
Yes.
hearing, and all those kinds of ways of communicating or understanding. And that factor, the arbitrariness, may still factor in this situation where you're communicating, you know, based on the senses. And with respect to animals, of course, linguistics is not really necessarily the most important factor, but they're all the senses that are involved here. It's just a general question. In fact, just to give you an idea of the kinds of things that may be raised eventually, if we're dealing with post-humanist theories, or and you think of the senses as belonging to being beyond human senses, or
yes, yeah. And it's interesting. It's actually pre-human, but we got it now. It's beyond human. Yeah, and interesting. Just a by note. Sorry, I'm taking up time now just to share an anecdote. But it was found now that dogs don't really know when you're coming home. I don't know. A lot of people see their dogs kind of freaking out 10 minutes before you come home. It's actually that they can smell you that far. That dog senses, or the sense of smell, is just that far, that evolved, that they can smell you miles away.
Yes. Yeah. And also included to that is the aspect of routine. Coming back at a particular moment of the day. Anyways, are there any more comments or questions, please? This is really fascinating. Okay, all right. This is amazing. Thank you so very much, Zeni. More power to you. And we're looking forward to the the fruits of this particular research, which looks quite promising indeed. Okay, all right. If there aren't any questions or comments, we will move on to the next presentation, if you allow me. Thank you so much again. Our next presenters, as you very well know, I hope so, don't, in my estimation, may not need that much of an introduction. You're probably quite familiar with Professor Jacobus Node and Professor Cynthia Miller-Node, who are both senior professors at the University of the Free State. Professor Jacobus Node's interests in Bible translation in Africa and the indigenization of biblical Hebrew linguistics for Bible translators. He does quite a lot of work in this area. And Professor Miller-Node's interest in, well, she is a senior professor and head of Hebrew department at the University of the Free State, I think. Her interests are in biblical Hebrew linguistics, the application of modern linguistic methodology and theory to the study of biblical Hebrew. Bible translation as well, modern translation of the Bible, especially in Africa, and ancient translations of the Bible as well. We are going to listen to them present jointly on the following topic, which I'm sure you've seen, intro translations of sacred texts and sacred space. So I will now cede the floor to both Professor Node and Professor Miller-Node. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. We're happy to be here. Can you hear me, first of all? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Okay, and do you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go to the first slide to make sure you see the first slide as well. It's progressing. Do you see the first slide, introduction?
Very well. I hope the others do too.
We only make sure. Okay,
yeah,
all right. Thank you very much for that introduction, Paul. We're happy to be here with you today virtually. Sacred space and its inextricable temporal counterpart, sacred time, provide a means for humans to separate manifestations of the divine hierophanies from ordinary profane existence. Sacred space, the translation of the concept of the sacred into spatial reality, is itself the translation of cultural worldviews of cosmic geography, cosmology, and cosmogony. The concrete realities of local shrines and centralized temples are both architectural translations of divine transcendence and translations of the manifestation of divine transcendence to those who enter. Sacred texts bear both an emergent and a symbiotic relationship to sacred space. Conceptions of the divine as embodied in sacred texts are translated into sacred spaces, but sacred spaces also shape conceptions of the sacred and its translation into Holy Writ. Sacred texts and their translations are usually seen in isolation without any consideration that the processes of religious experience in interaction with the reality which brought them about, as well as the processes which map religious knowledge to reality, can also be seen as processes of translation. In this essay, we argue that these processes are instances of intra-translation in the sense that they involve a semiotic transfer of meaning within a particular culture or religious belief system. In other words, these are semiotic meaning-making processes within as opposed to across cultures. The goal of this paper is to avoid the fragmentation of religious translation that results from a focus solely on interlingual translation by holistically including other kinds of translation processes in order to enhance the meaning-making process of religious translation. Translating sacred space as an example of religious intra-translation will be examined in this paper. We will deal with the processes of translating sacred space by describing the linking of sacred space in texts to the physical reality which brought the idea of sacred space about, as well as the mapping of this knowledge to new realities in texts as instances of intra-translation. On the basis of Lefebvre, space can be understood as divided into three categories. The first is physical space, or space as empirical and material. The second is mental space, or conceived space. The third is social space, or lived space. Space is thus not objective or passive, but an active force that is knowledge and action. Drawing on Martinin 2007, these distinctions of space can be understood semiotically with reference to pers. The sign or representatum is something that stands to somebody for something in some respect or capacity. The object is what the sign stands for, and the interpretant is an equivalent sign or perhaps a more developed sign that is created in the mind of the person. Martinin argues that the sign and the object are related by perception. The object and the interpretant are related by action or habit, and the sign and the interpretant are related by interpretation. In this view, all three types of space can be accommodated, with social space being ultimately interpreted by different kinds of habits and practices that are somehow related to those places. In other words, social space is the interpretant of the object that takes place by action, practice, or habit. In this way, spatial space is then essentially embodied practice.
Sacred space is where heaven and earth meet. Sacred space, the translation or the concept of the sacred into spatial reality, provides a means for humans to separate manifestations of the divine from ordinary existence. As it is itself the translation of cultural worldviews of cosmic geography, cosmology, and cosmogony, the next section will show how the concrete realities of local shrines and centralized temples are both architectural translations of divine transcendence and translations of the manifestation of divine transcendence to those who enter. The sense of divinity is mediated through sacred spaces as well as through texts. Sacred texts bear both an emergent and a symbiotic relationship to sacred space. Conceptions of the divine as embodied in sacred texts are translated into sacred spaces, but sacred spaces also shape conceptions of the sacred and its translation into sacred writings. In this section, we examine the translation and retranslation of sacred space as physical space, conceptual space, and social space. Its translation from and into sacred texts using the example of ancient Israel within the cultural context of the ancient Near East. The spatial characteristics of the tabernacle, the movable shrine of the Israelites' wilderness wanderings, are meticulously described in the priestly text as revealed by God to Moses on Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is also the location of a conceptual heavenly temple made not by human, but by divine hands as a dwelling place of the divine, who is described as a one of Sinai. The tabernacle or tent of meeting at the base of the mountain was modeled upon it, so that the one at the base and the other one at the top were in exact correspondence. After the tabernacle was erected as the tent of meeting at Mount Sinai, it was transported through the wilderness to the conquered land of Canaan and was eventually settled in Shiloh in the form of a more solid structure. It was from Shiloh that this sacred cultic object, the art, was taken to Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. In the textual tradition, there is this depicted an emergent, partially overlapping translation of sacred space from the divinely conceptualized tabernacle on Sinai to the physical tabernacle to the Shiloh shrine, and from the Shiloh shrine to Solomon's temple. Although this textual narrative probably reflects an oral tradition of ancient Israelite history, in reality, the magnificent structure of the tabernacle with its gold, bronze, and intricate tapestries could not have been produced at the time of the wilderness wanderings. Instead, the tabernacle is a conceptual sacred space whose blueprint largely corresponds to Solomon's temple. The tabernacle was a Ethiopian projection or translation into the past or the later building. Note that the tabernacle is not an artificial projection or translation of a fixed structure. Instead, the description of the tabernacle is structurally adapted or indigenized to reflect the nomadic or semi-nomadic conditions of the wilderness wanderings prior to the settlement in Canaan. Similarly, the textual tradition does not reflect the silo structure that succeeded the tabernacle in its original direct form, but rather the details of Solomon's later temple were retrojected onto Shiloh. The sacred space of Solomon's temple, as described in the biblical narrative, is as a result of two translational acts as recorded in the biblical text, that or the conceptual dwelling of God in Sinai and or the wilderness tabernacle. At the same time, Solomon's physical temple served as a prototype or incipient text for the retrospective translation in the biblical text of divine dwelling on Sinai and the wilderness tabernacle. These sacred spaces were physical or conceptual, all play a role as social spaces for religious ritual within the textual tradition.
In addition to the tabernacle, Solomon's temple provided the inspiration for two other literary or conceptual temples in which its image is reflected. The first is the temple depicted in the prophecy of Ezekiel, which never existed in reality, but is an imaginary construction. Its plan is translated through reshaping so that it is excessively schematized for order and to bring it into line with the requirements of the priestly school for which Ezekiel was a disciple. For example, the courts are square, the gates and chambers are arranged with painstaking symmetry, and the temple compound is separated from the royal palace and placed far away from the city. The second is the idealized temple in an eschatological New Jerusalem known from the Temple Scroll, a document from the Jewish community on the shores of the Dead Sea, dating to approximately the 2nd century BCE. In both cases, selected characteristics of Solomon's physical temple are translated into the literary representations of idealized conceptual temples. The representation and translation of sacred space in ancient Israel involves three interwoven traditions: the oral traditions lying behind the textual tradition and the architectural tradition. We understand the religious context of ancient Israel to exemplify a hearing-dominant culture in which cultural traditions were internalized and conveyed mainly by word of mouth, while texts were written for archives and libraries to serve as reference points for memorization and recitation of the tradition. In other words, in a hearing-dominant culture such as ancient Israel, writing was known, but documents were written less frequently and for more constrained purposes than in a text-dominant culture in which orality plays a less prominent role. The translation of sacred space thus depends on the nature of the religious translation with respect to oral and written traditions. We can broadly categorize religious traditions into three groups. Religious traditions with dominant written traditions. These are namely the monotheistic religions, the Jewish religion, Christianity, and Islam. The second category is religions with a dominant oral tradition, namely African traditional religions, Chinese folk religions, Native American religions, and Pacific indigenous religions. Finally, religions with oral tradition and foundational religious texts, namely the Hindu religion, the Buddhist religion, Baha'i, Jain, Sikh, Shinto, Taoist, Dinliku, Wicca, and the Zoroastrian religions. Having briefly examined the religious tradition of ancient Israel, which fits into the first category, we now consider the opposite extreme, a religious tradition with a dominant oral tradition. We take as our example an African religion, namely the Eland San of Southern Africa, living in Lesotho and KwaZulu-Natal in the Drakensberg for at least 2,000 years. They became extinct toward the end of the 19th century. We hasten to add that we are not experts in this religious tradition, and the source of all of our information is published reports and research by those who are. In examining the question of sacred space and its translation among the Eland San people, we are considering an oral culture which is known to us primarily through their magnificent rock paintings found in caves. In making the case that these rock paintings relate both to sacred space and a sacred text, we first consider whether it's possible to identify instances of symbolic communication among prehistoric cave dwellers.
To do that, we go to Blombos Cave, an archaeological site located in Blombos Private Nature Reserve, about 300 kilometers east of Cape Town, along the coast of South Africa. The cave contains Middle Stone Age deposits currently dated at between 100,000 and 70,000 years before present, and a late Stone Age sequence dated at between 2,000 and 300 years before present. The cave site was first excavated in 1991, and the field work has been conducted there on a regular basis since 1997 and is ongoing. The excavations at Blombos Cave have yielded important new information on the behavioral evolution of anatomically modern humans. The most informative archaeological material from Blombos Cave includes engraved ochre, engraved bone ochre, processing kits, and refined bone and stone tools. For our purposes, we consider the 41 marine shell beads made of a species of sea snails. These shell beads are approximately 75,000 years old. They have been perforated in a way that is difficult to explain as a result of natural processes. They have flattened facets, and 4 of them show microscopic traces of red ochre on their surfaces and insides. 33 shells were found in 6 groups of 2 to 12 beads, with all 6 groups being recovered in a single excavation day, and all 6 coming either from a single square or from 2 adjacent sub-squares of the cave. Shells found in the same group are similar in regard to their adult size, their shade, and their type of perforation. The argument is that the shells were transformed into beads if transported and accumulated by humans. The shells have perforations that were made by humans. The shells have properties that were caused by use wear, for example, by rubbing on something, and the shells exhibit traces of ochre resulting from tool use by humans. Botha concludes the assumptions given the right kind of warrant for the conclusion that the shells in question are beads. In our terms, then, there was translation from shells into beads.
Were these shell beads symbols within a sign system? In other words, were they semiotic? The following assumptions are needed to link beads, ornaments, and symbols. Assumption 1, the beads were worn as ornaments by the Middle Stone Age inhabitants of Blombos Cave. Assumption 2, personal ornaments and art are unquestioned expressions of symbolism that equate with modern human behavior. The 3 properties of symbols then are the following. Symbols are objects that have a meaning. The meaning of symbols is assigned by arbitrary social conventions, tacit agreements, or explicit codes. And symbols make possible the storage and display of information external to the human brain. To infer that the Blombos beads had the status of symbols, one needs to present specifics of at least 3 factors. The meaning meanings that these beads had for the inhabitants of the cave, the social conventions by which these beads were assigned the meanings at issue, and the information that was stored in or displayed by these beads in the event that this information differed from these meanings. Buddha concludes, after examining the evidence, that to remove these doubts, the grounding and the warrant of the step to symbols require better underpinning.
Such an underpinning comes from the Sling, a San community interpreter who had the opportunity to offering an intersemiotic translation of rock painting of the Eland Sun from the wall of the She Hong Kong cave in Lesotho in 1873 and 1874 to J.M. Orpen, who published this account in the Cape Monthly magazine under the title A Glimpse into the Mythology of the Maluti Bushmen. It is one of the only three known rock painting sites in the whole of Southern Africa for which we possess interpretations of some images given by someone for whom the production of rock art was still a living tradition. The others are Melikane, 40 kilometers to the south, and Pitzaneng, 1 kilometer upstream. The linguist studying the Son, W.H. Bleek, read this article and showed the painting to a number of Kalahari Son or Gemsbok Son from Katkop near Calvinia who lived with him. Orpen's record of Schlink's exegesis and Bleek's Katkop friends' supplement of it remain the only authentic San exegesis of a Son painting ever recorded.
In his intertranslation of Orpen and Bleek, Ferran in 1982 kept as close as possible to the reported words of King and the Katkop San as grammatically possible. So this is the interpretation or the intertranslation. In that painting, we see a water thing or water cow, which in the lower part is discovered by a San man behind whom stands a San woman. This San man beckons to the others to come and help him. Then they charm the animal and attach a rope to its nose in the upper part of the picture. They are in the rain. The upper part of the picture shows that they must use a long rope and lead it over a wide part of the country. Where it goes, the rain will fall. The strokes are rain. Of the San who lead the water cow, 2 are rain specialists, the 2 nearest the cow. The chief of them is nearest the animal. In their hands are holders made of tortoiseshell containing blessed buchu. Strings ornamented with beads hang down from these holders. The 2 men are preceded by 2 San women, one of whom wears a cap. She is painted white for the dance. The others are people spoiled by the Mokoma dance because their noses bleed. God gave us the song of this dance and told us to dance it, and people would die from it, probably collapse in a trance, and he would give them medicine to raise them again. It is a circular dance of men and women, and it is danced all night. Some fall down, some become as if mad and sick. Blood runs from the noses of others whose medicine is weak, and they eat charm medicine in which is burnt snake powder. The water animal is a very large animal with horns or quills, which lives in pools or rivers. Light flashes from its eyes. There are men who have died who also live in rivers with the water animal. The rain specialists know them. This dance and the leading of the water animal is usually performed when the wind is from the north.
By 1961, the anthropologist Vinnie Cohn has found at least 308 painting sites on the walls of caves in the Drakensberg Range in South Africa and Lesotho. These sites contain 8,478 paintings, which means an average of 57 per shelter. 53% of the paintings are of human figures, 43% of animals, and 4% are of miscellaneous objects. The recent count is 500 sites in 230,000 hectare area with more than 10,000 paintings. The Kham whose members were responsible for many of the paintings are extinct. The original purpose of the paintings was theological rather than decorative. To experience rock art as the sun themselves did, we need to approach the pictures as we would a religious writing, rather than as if we are examining an art exhibition. Gling supplemented his translation with a fuller account of the Gam mythology. Humans are trapped in a circle of evil from which there is no exit. The Gam associated themselves with the Eland, a sort of living icon of God. The Eland is a child of the Creator. The behavior of the Eland, which concentrate in herds during the rainy season and disperse when food is scarce, was regarded by some as closely parallel to their own social customs. The eland's gestation period is the same as that of humans. Eland were to some almost human. They have a deep respect for all life in general and the life of the eland in particular. The psychological plight of captivity in evil stemmed from the need to kill eland in order to live. To kill them by using skills and good fortune sent by God, yet in so doing to be charming themselves as well as their victims and offending God. God does not love us if we kill an eland. God is with the eland when it dies and resurrects the animal. The hunter must walk with a limp. He must fast and mourn for the animal and be purified. When the animal is painted, God resurrects it. The painting of an animal was a ritual. Eland blood is used in painting. Overpainting and repainting are meant to show that the eland lives again, and that reconciliation and atonement have taken place. Eland herd together when the rain comes. The rain bull is an eland. If there is a violent storm, this is from the rain bull. If there is a gentle soaking rain, it comes from his cow. If an eland is shot, there will be a disastrous results on the rain. The account of the nature of being, the source of suffering and evil, and what can be done to remedy it, of life after death, and of God and his involvement with creation were all translated in the ritual depicted in the cave wall at Segongong, and in the very act of painting it as well. This is what the sun read when they looked at that painting.
All religions make use of symbols. Religions do not necessarily write their symbols invariably. Some of them record their theology in carvings, in drawings, and in architecture as sacred spaces. In addition, they speak their symbols and act them in ritual gestures and in dances. Rock art is the sacred writing or semiotic communication of the cave dweller. The painting on the wall of a cave is no less than a sacred writing within a sacred space that recreates ancient ritual and symbolizes religious beliefs. In conclusion, we have examined how sacred space was translated in ancient Israel, a religious tradition in a hearing-dominant culture with a written tradition. Sacred space involves a complex web of intra-translation between and among oral tradition and text and space, including physical space, conceptual space, and social space. Sacred space among the prehistoric Eland San people also involves a complex web of intra-translation between and among oral tradition, symbolic representations of ritual and tradition in the form of rock paintings, and sacred space, including at least physical space and social space. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this very rich, informative, meticulously researched presentation, and it's it's just fascinating how much work can go into such research, and I've learned quite a lot myself. I'm hoping that the listeners have also learned quite a lot themselves. The floor is now open to comments and questions from everyone, with a hand show or by typing your question in the chat box. That would be helpful if you want to do so right away. In the meantime, I just want to say that there are a couple of things that I wanted to talk about right away as we wait for reactions from the audience. The idea of iconicity, the fact that we're talking in terms of very important iconic, symbols here. We're talking about tabernacle, Solomon's physical space, and other such iconic, sacred spaces. The translation of this into spatial, what you call the spatial translation of this into spatial reality, sounds very interesting to me, and reminds me a bit of something I talk about in my work in relation to things that are fairly modern, the concept of translocation. I'm just wondering if you could give us an insight in some of the motivations for this kinds of special translation, the motivations for this iconic representation in, from its iconic situation into a spatial reality.
So why it happens that there is iconic translation.
Paul, are you asking about why is there iconic translation from these particular structures, or I'm not quite sure. Maybe we didn't grasp your question properly.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that these are very iconic, images or symbols in history. And what we're learning here is that there is a thing called spatial translation, which is the representation of this, moving it from one context to another, and all the like. And I hope I understand you correctly. And I was wondering what could be, I'm sure there are, the basic motivation for that kind of special translating.
Well, what I can think to say is that Solomon's Temple is at the center of these various kinds of translation, both in terms of retrojecting back to the wilderness tabernacle and back to the heavenly pattern of the wilderness tabernacle. Solomon's Temple is retrojected back. And then Solomon's Temple is also translated forward as conceptual space as well, in terms of Ezekiel, in terms of the Qumran temple scroll. So Solomon's Temple is really the centerpiece. And so I think that one would have to look at the symbolism then within Solomon's Temple, which is a very rich symbolic structure as well. And then to understand what is translated back and what is translated forward and what changes are made. So we didn't talk about the changes that are made between, or only in general terms, that there is indigenization in the retrojection back to the wilderness tabernacle, because you have to have a structure that's essentially a tent that can be folded up and carried on poles, and the poles are described, and the portability of that structure in the 40 years of wilderness wandering is described. But in fact, many of the symbolic features remain, even though it's indigenized for the wandering. And similarly, Ezekiel's temple moving forward portrays a particular priestly kind of ideology that was present in the post-exilic period. So I don't know if that helps you or not, but we're really giving just an overview. Help. We're not really going into the details, which would be a book.
Yeah, so I think what we do is in a very elementary still, because it's far more complicated. What you have, for example, in the formation of the textual evidence or in life, there was a second temple which Ezra and Nehemiah rebuilt. And so to do that rebuilding and to give authority to it, to show, oh, this come from a long time, this was actually, so there are always these retranslations. And in that, when Herod, the Temple of Herod, which you read in the New Testament, is a rebuilding of the second temple, and then in terms of Christi, although the Temple Mount and Jerusalem is very sacred to Christians, they retranslate it in the sense that they say, okay, the temple will be destroyed. Jesus said it, and even today, the fact that the temple is not rebuilt on that era, Christians say this was the forecast or the promise of Jesus Christ. So even if there is not a temple, the place is still value and the kind of sacredness for Christians. So I think in terms of we take the Israelite temple and its development because it's within our whole life we work with Bible translation and had to do that. But if you look in religions in various religions, the iconic value of a temple or of a sacred space stays there. For example, for Islam, is the Mount of the Temple Mount, still very important. It's the third most holy place for Islam, and that is a place where Muhammad sent to heaven, and it's also a place where politicians had to work together to translate that place or to work out. So there are many times unrest around the Temple Mount, but at least every time it comes that Christians and Islam and Jews can still use more or less the same sacred space. The Jews pray at the Western Wall, and that is for them, although they view the whole Temple Mount as a sacred space, that is their participation in that. So the iconic value, I would say, is not only the real, but it's the sacred space tell you the belief for believers that is the presence, the place where God is present.
Thank you. That's really quite clear. Thank you so very much. Let's listen to Peter now.
Hello,
yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Jacobus and Cynthia, for that amazing, very interesting talk. I'm really interested in this notion of sacred space, and in what you were saying there, you partly answered the question I wanted to ask, but my question was about the repurposing of sacred space. I'm thinking, for example, of Le Mont Saint-Michel in Normandy in France, which is a place of pilgrimage, which for Christians, for Catholics actually. But in earlier times, in pre-Christian times, it was a sacred site, Celtic, for the Celtic god Lugh. So, and you encountered that a lot in Europe, that, you know, important places of pilgrimage or churches are built on pre-Christian sacred space. And my question was, have you encountered this repurposing in your research? outside of the temple and the mosque and the Wailing Wall?
The repurposing, there are very nice example, which is the architectural translation of the site I know for the moment is out of my. No, yeah, the Hagia Sophia is another one, but the one in India where a Christian temple, no, not a Christian temple, a Hindu temple was then they utilize an old material and repurpose it into a mosque. And it's very clear that the participants is a gradual move, shift from Hinduism to Islam, and so they repurpose the whole Hindu temple so that it become a mosque, and so they utilize that material. The other one with Cynthia is a Hagia Sophia, which started off as a recreation of Rome. So it's in the socio-cultural history is that this where Rome was seen as a center of the world, then suddenly in the Byzantium time, Constantinople was seen as center of the world. And what the Hagia Sophia translate is not only the presence of God, but the beauty of it was to say that it must reflect the creation of God. So as a space, so and then it become a mosque, and then Ataturk changed it into a museum. And it's about 2020, it is again a mosque. So the repurposing of, and the Hagia Sophia, for example, is translated, I have a whole list of churches or cathedrals in other parts of the world, in America, Europe, who are translations, actually reproductions, and not only churches. There is churches, mosques, and synagogues on the Hagia Sophia. Utilize its architectural plan and structure, and this is the Hagia Sophia is really a very nice example. And then a further translation around the Hagia Sophia is that you have all these visitors who come to Constantinople, the travelers, and they then do a translation in there, give a whole description in their travel documents about the beauty, and even then there are paintings through ages, which there are at least 6 very important texts and a few paintings which or other kinds of translations of the Hagia Sophia.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's as informative as usual, very well researched, meticulously done, and we've learned so very much. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot more time for questions, but you can always contact Professor Node and Node for if you have questions. That would be a good idea. I think we should move on to the next presentation. Thanks again. And the next presenter is Mr. Abdul Karim Shaban Mandeni. I'm sorry if I did not pronounce the name correctly. And Mr. Mandeni is a lecturer in language studies. He lectures English and communication skills courses at the Department of Language Studies and the College of Social Sciences and Humanities of Sokoy University of Agriculture. His area of interests it would include second language teaching, language and gender, academic writing, language policy and planning, and critical thinking. He will be talking to us today about Kiswahili translation on the scientific and space-related terminology. Okay, Monsieur, up to you now. Thank you very much.
Hello, good evening.
Hello.
Good morning and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Let me share my screen here. Can you see my first slide there?
Yes, we can see
we
it.
can.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so thank you, Professor Bandia, for
Okay. It looks like your thing has stalled a bit. Okay, let's see. I think your system has stalled, Mr. Mandani. Let me just go see if we can. Let's see. We just hope he will have the time to reconnect. So I have a feeling that it's a connection problem.
Maybe, I don't know if we can see you're speaking, but we can't hear you.
Yeah. He's back, yeah.
We just can't hear him.
Can you unmute? I think he was unmuted. I think he was unmuted.
and I don't know why it is
Very
Okay,
now
we can hear you now.
Now it's clear. Now it's very clear. And we can see you very well.
Okay, the problem is I don't see my slide then. Should I share it again?
Yes, please share it again.
Okay, here we go. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So I was saying that I'm also a student at the University of the Free State. I was just invited or joined this team later as a linguist to shape it or to add some ideas because a lot of terms were just taken from Google Translate. So it was decided that someone who is a language expert can come in and share his or her ideas. So I was there, or I joined this team as a linguist. My colleagues, all of them are natural scientists. Okay, so we are going to, I'm going to cover the following. First of all, it is important for people here to understand what is the International Academy of Astronautics, and then the multilingual space dictionary. This is IAA multilingual space dictionary, space technology development in Africa, the potential of Kiswahili in building African space capacity, the similar work in other African languages, translation process, sample translated terminologies, the future, and that's all. So the International Academy of Astronauts, IAA, was founded in Stockholm on August 16, 1960. The IAA is involved in numerous scientific activities. For example, the Academy deals or encourages different activities in space sciences, space life sciences, space technology, system development, space system operations and utilization, etc., etc. It also conducts conferences per year. It publishes cosmic studies dealing with a wide variety of topics, including space exploration, space debris, small satellites, space traffic, among others. It also publishes the Journal of the International Academy of Astronautics, where this paper has been published. It publishes dictionaries in 24 languages, last languages, Afrikaans and Swahili or Kiswahili. Normally, in the native speakers call it Kiswahili. Okay. Also, it publishes books, series on small satellite conference proceeding, remote sensing, and history. The Multilingual Space Dictionary. This paper, therefore, explores the space dictionary translation to Kiswahili and its potential to arouse interest for building African space technology capacity. So, to begin with, it is important to understand the genesis of this translation. So the first thing was the creation or the establishment of the Multilingual Space Dictionary by IAA. Because space is a dynamic field characterized by new invention and innovation. And then development of more sophisticated technology is still expected in the near future. Similarly, the volume of space terminology has maintained an increasing trend, hence compelling the need for frequent updates. So updates in relation to knowledge is very important. Recognizing this demand, the IAA established a compilation of 7 language astronautical multilingual dictionary that was published in 1970 in Prague. A full dictionary starts with the preparation of a lexicon, which is a collection of corresponding terms in 2 or more languages. This is then followed by a dictionary that contains broader definition of terms and their meanings. The last step is to develop a machine-translated soft dictionary. A committee was set up by IAA to compile a multilingual terminology database on astronautics, and it started actual work in 1988. After a lot of symposia, conferences, etc., then in 1995, the academic requested all the language coordinators to prepare a computer-friendly version of the dictionary in 4 discs, the last stage in the preparation of a multilingual dictionary. About 20 dictionaries from different languages have been received to date. And therefore, Kiswahili lexicon is based on translation of the current dictionary with 494 terms, drawing from lexicons published in 2010 by IAA. So we extracted these terms from IAA published lexicons. Space technology development in Africa. The current situation in Africa depicts major growth of space industry in the near future. Africa is characterized by huge diversity in political, economic, and cultural system, but it is commonly united by its predominantly similar challenges. So many countries in Africa normally have got similar challenges when it comes to social, if you mention education, if you mention things like maybe lack of human and physical resources, etc., etc. Therefore, our policymakers are appreciating the need for space technology and its contribution to solution. For societal benefits. A number of countries have established or have the potential to establish their own space program. For example, Nigeria, South Africa, Algeria, Egypt, Morocco, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Ghana. There are evident concerted efforts by some African governments to fund space programs. Therefore, the approach of intra-African and interregional collaboration has always been emphasized during the sequential African leadership conferences on space science and technology for sustainable development, ALC. Okay, so this is important that you need to combine your efforts so that you can achieve development of some kind. This cooperation can be enhanced through a common language. So the issue of common language here comes in, and that's why on our side, or on the decision from the meetings from IAEA and the agents, so the importance of having Kiswahili, of having a Kiswahili space lexicon and a dictionary. The fourth ALC held in Mombasa in Kenya in 2011 resulted with a resolution called the Mombasa Declaration that recognized the benefits that space technology brings in ensuring the well-being of humanity, and specifically to the economic, social, and cultural development. And I think that's why we are here learning different issues related to community translation. It noted that space further enhances peace and cooperation since it transcends national boundaries. This is an important aspect in Africa in fostering transboundary and international security. So actually we claim to have things like skies, for example, that this is our sky, but when it comes to space, normally we share the thing, and therefore combining different countries or different experts in learning space is paramount. One major solution to existing capacity gaps is to focus on building fundamental knowledge and creating space awareness across all institutions and learning. So the important issue here is knowledge and awareness. Now let's see the potential. Let's see the potential of Kiswahili in building African space capacity. The fifth ALC held in Accra in 2013 agreed to improve access to high-level education. So high-level education and training, encourage knowledge sharing through scholarly interaction among African nations, foster closer cooperation between universities and institutions with the already established programs for the benefit of students and the professionals in both the private and the public sector. Again, it is reiterated here, the issue of public awareness on science, on space science activities. Emphasis was also given to the delegates to put up efforts to provide youth and young scholars with the knowledge for space activities. You see, if you want this thing to be sustainable, you need youth who are aware or knowledgeable, for that matter, in this particular field. Kiswahili has undisputable potential in opening up space technological knowledge to local communities and fostering science and technology. You know, Kiswahili is, we can say now, is a lingua franca in the East Africa region. And in Kenya and Tanzania, for example, the language is used in school, teaching and learning. So one advantage is that Kiswahili is the subject and the teaching, also teaching language in curricula of user countries. Okay. When it comes to comparison, this work is similar to what has been done in South Africa. So in South Africa, also they had, or they have the English Afrikaans dictionary translation of space terminology, which was published in 2011 by the IAA. This translation was motivated by the acknowledgement that establishing cooperation would require indigenous understanding of terminologies in the domain of space sciences. The reference version used in the same one used in the Kiswahili translation with over 3,500 terminologies in space industry. So as you can see, we have got very, very few dictionary. Up until now, we have got the Afrikaans one, English Afrikaans one, and what we are going to publish, the current one. The translation process. So far, the multilingual dictionary has been translated to 20 languages: Afrikaans, Arabic, Bulgarian, Chinese, etc., etc. Therefore, inclusion of Kiswahili version of the technical space dictionary is an idea whose time has come. Discussions on English Swahili translation started in 2011 after the remote sensing of the environment for sub-Saharan Africa regional workshop in Nairobi, Kenya. The Secretary General of the Academy suggested undertaking a project in African languages. The list of technical terms contained translation in Japanese and French languages was delivered in December 2011. Research work and the preparation for the translation started in February 2012. So these are different methods that are or were used in this process. Google Translate, which was not that accurate, and actually, as we can see later, we can see its weaknesses. Existing non-technical dictionary, researching or asking the locals, especially people like fishers. Fishers are very good when it comes to astronautic terms. You know, they sometimes, they always use things like stars and the different morphology of the sky to interpret or to communicate different concepts. Also borrowing, again, as you can see here, the issue of foreignization and the domestication. That's why yesterday I was very, very interested in that presentation that included the issue of domestication and foreignization. And sometimes it reached a time where we decided maybe we should coin, because sometimes you don't have any word to compare. You don't have any word as a correspondent term or equivalent term. That was a big challenge. So here we have sample translated terminologies. Here we have got English terminology, and on the right we have corresponding to Swahili translation. This is what I wanted to say. Actually, this work hasn't been published yet hasn't been developed as a full dictionary yet. At the time, when we were in this particular process, I joined my PhD studies, and my friends, we were disturbed by financial issues and the other challenges. So we're still refining the thing. And as you can see here in this list, for those people who understand Kiswahili, there are some kind of weaknesses in the interpretation. Actually, this is what we were doing now, reshaping and refining it so that we can be able to publish it as a full dictionary. You can see the words such as aberration, for example. It has been translated as isio kawaida. I think this is not, it's not okay. And this is what actually we are doing, or we were doing at that particular time. Okay. So the future. The lexicon has undergone thorough drafting stage, as I have already told you, and currently careful review and verification of terminology is being conducted before it is submitted for publication. The authors of the lexicon are sourcing for a publisher. The current translation work is the first stage to set a new era of developing a complete Kiswahili dictionary. This is our intention, actually. The lexicon tried to strictly provide only direct term-to-term translation, but due to the challenges in the young Kiswahili language, not that quote unquote, young Kiswahili language in academia, not as a language itself. As a language, we know that it is rich, but in academia, Kiswahili is still young. So this has got a lot of challenges, and this is what we are fighting up until now. After the publication, efforts will be made to facilitate availability of this dictionary in public library for access by public and policymakers. An exercise that is expected to generate more collaboration in space affairs by Kiswahili and non-Kiswahili speaking countries. And this marks the end of my presentation. Okay. Dear scholars, you are welcome for your contribution or anything you think that's important that we can elaborate this work. You are welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mandeni. This is really, really promising and interesting. I'm fascinated by what seems to be the Pan-African dimension of this work. It's going to be a major endeavor for collaboration among different parts of the continent. And I was, going to let the floor to everyone and to get some questions and comments. Yes, Frederick.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Abdul Karim, for this wonderful presentation. Really, as our chair has marked it, it's almost Pan-Africanism, so to say. Well, I have a question on this dictionary, the prospective dictionary. Wondering if you, in your research, you involve all Swahili speakers, especially in East Africa, perhaps in Tanzania, Kenya, because our Kiswahili is not the same. They are dialects, I can say. So even these fishermen might be different in contributing to having a wonderful dictionary. It might be accepted in one country and perhaps it might be challenging in the other. So I would like to know whether you involve many players in the sense that some are from Kenya, from Uganda, Tanzania, and perhaps Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, or you focus on Tanzania only? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Chiwanga, for a very critical question. And I should admit that due to financial challenges and maybe, what should I say, time, we haven't been able to reach all these people. Of course, 2 scholars come from Kenya and 2 scholars come from Tanzania. But you know, researching these things need some kind of capacity. So up until now, what we do is when someone is able to do that, because we don't have enough money to study the whole region. So I agree, if we could say that that is part of the weaknesses of this process, that will be one of them. We haven't been able to reach all these people actually. Yeah, that I could say something like that. But later on, the idea is it's not just a matter of give and take. We normally discuss together. We have got these small pieces of conferences. So we meet online, we discuss these issues to see if this will be acceptable or not. And then, as you can see, we have got some lists. So we show to other people, for example, other experts, but to reach many people, it has been a very big challenge, actually. I should agree. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more comments and questions, please? Yeah, one of the comments on the chat said something quite interesting, that this is indeed a breakthrough for Africans in Africa as well in translation studies. And I think that's really the case. I was wondering, at the meeting, the conference that you mentioned, was that under some umbrella association? Do you now have some kind of a Pan-African, quote unquote, association that is bringing together interested parties working on in this area?
Yes, because the IAA have got some kind of agents, and as you can see, Dr. Ndiritu, who is the corresponding author, is the one who spearheaded the thing through through AU. They've got an office there. And this is an umbrella thing that normally, as you can see in my first or second slides, is talking about this institution. Yeah.
That's interesting.
And then I should admit here again, I think my colleague Ndiritu, if he was here, he could give a very good, precise information about that.
That kind of collaboration between, you know, researchers in translation studies university and engineers, you know, specialists in space science and all that. It is fascinating, I think,
sure.
Which is not only going to be beneficial translation studies per se, it is already, but it's going to encourage, I hope so, governments to invest into these kinds of studies, you know, engineering studies in space, because Africa has that potential. Occasionally you find Africans in different scientific groups across the globe doing this kind of work, and they could very well do such things within the continent. That would be fascinating. Just one question, if somebody is not taking the floor yet. Given that Kiswahili, it's a lingua franca in, you know, the East African context, if you were to conceive of this as an Africanist project, you know, a Pan-Africanist project, you think that you'll be thinking in terms of having those major lingua francas in different parts to work with, or is it going to be Kiswahili first, and once we have a steady feet, once we feel comfortable, then we can begin to think of translating into other lingua francas or other major languages across the continent?
Oh, that's very interesting. Interesting question, actually. We conduct our work in a very challenging environment. So who knows? So maybe one day we are going to have Kiswahili and the other lingua franca, such as Hausa in Western region.
Western region.
Yeah. But for now, I should say no. We just stick with the Kiswahili because we don't have that capacity. But that's the thinking, actually. And I agree to your point. We need to have these different lingua francas and having different dictionary or having different material explained in those particular lingua francas. So I take it as a recommendation, and actually it's very pertinent.
I think so. It might get the various governments and the various stakeholders interested in the project too, in the different parts. You see what I mean?
Absolutely.
That would be a good
Absolutely.
idea. That's right. Any other questions or comments? Just one last one. We have some time, so I just want to ask again, just to out of curiosity, because I'm particularly intrigued by this project. It's just fascinating. So far, in the context of terminology, when we work towards what one would call the languages that are not yet scientifically equipped, when you work towards those languages in the area of space and any technology area, the tendency has been to be able to create, you know, neologisms and all the like, and you know, basically creating a language that it's going to become scientific in another context, for local consumption, for local you know, interest. Are you seeing more of a tendency of domestication than foreignization, or vice versa? How are you seeing this so far? Just, you know, tentatively.
To be honest, it's something which is very, very challenging, because creating words is not a simple task.
Not at all.
It's not a simple task, but we do that. And we do that, as I have already mentioned, by consulting people. And in my opinion, I would like to have some kind of domestication. I'm after domestication. But sometimes I felt myself caught in a trap. Okay, you have to use other methods such as borrowing, which actually now when it comes to borrowing, it's very, very, very possible to be found yourself in foreignization. So it's something like that. And sometimes actually we argue together by saying that, okay, no, let's put in this way, let's put in this way. It is challenging, actually. It is very challenging. Yeah.
I hope you're also having recourse, or you would eventually have recourse to fellow colleagues who are translation specialists as well, but who are mainly terminologists. This is one thing we don't talk about as much these days. We often talk about translator interpreting, which is great, but terminology, you know, terminologies and terminology, even to a certain extent, lexicographers, but particular terminology, they're part of the workings of translation. And I'm sure you would be aware or familiar with some people, you know, who work in that area. The Africans have done stuff on terminology, trying to adapt scientific terms to African oral tradition, you know, languages and all that. So terminologies are going to be very handy here. Are you working with any terminologists at all, or are you just doing things?
For now, not yet, but we were thinking about consulting people from the University of Dar es Salaam. We have got the Kiswahili Institute there, and then also we have got the national I don't know, Forum for Kiswahili. I don't know how it is translated in English actually, but it deals or has got the authority. Yeah, Mr. Chiwanga. Chiwanga, are you there?
Of Tanzania.
Yes, Kiswahili Council. Oh, thank you very much. Kiswahili Council of
Kiswahili Council of Tanzania.
Yes, we were thinking of consulting these particular institutes. Yes. Yeah,
that's good. That's good. Peter, I see you have a comment there. Do you want to mention it yourself, because I don't want to read it?
Okay. I just I'm actually quite serious about this. I think, you know, for inventing words, which is the challenge you mentioned. Thank you for your talk, by the way.
Thank you.
Inventing words. Well, poets are usually good at inventing words, or you know, combining words and giving them new meaning, or you know, sort of fishing up old words and giving them more contemporary meaning. And I think the mindset of a literary translator works in a similar way. The literary translator is sort of has to draw on similar skills to the poet. So maybe, you know, it might be helpful to have people like this on your committee to help you work with this. Of course, yeah. this is, terminology is notoriously difficult.
Mhm.
But maybe this might add a little extra resource. You might be able to get, people who are professional translators to work with you. If you get a little bit of funding, which is always a problem, wherever you go, funding is a problem.
It is. Isn't
Yeah.
it?
Okay.
That's right.
But it's a wonderful project,
I like it.
and I wish you every success with it.
Mhm, mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter. It's really
Yeah.
a very wonderful project. Just another little thing. Can you give us a bit of an idea of the input of those in the project who are coming to it from the space technology side of things? Meaning, there must be, I assume there must be people there who may not necessarily be linguists like us, but they're coming from the space science part of things.
Oh, okay. First of all, thank you, Peter, for your valuable contribution. This actually is what we were working with. We need these experts to do this. And with regard to your question, Bandia, we don't have people who are specialists from
Space sciences.
Space technology or space as a field or astronauts, but we do have people. I mean, in our team, for example, I know Dr. Noral, who has got a PhD in physics and interested in this particular subject. Yeah.
Well, that's what I meant. Not necessarily people working for NASA yet. I mean, like people who do physics and nuclear physics or physics or all those kinds of topics. What I'm trying to say basically is that it would be an incredible collaboration between translation scholars and language specialists like ourselves and all these other people who work in the sciences, and they could be very helpful, especially if we can pull some of them from the local community or from Africa or African background. That's right. Okay.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, look, this has been a wonderful presentation. I'm so glad that we are concluding with this one because it opens up into the future, which is fascinating because I personally would encourage this, and I look forward to seeing the kind of work that you guys are going to be doing. And do not be reluctant to request funding for this, because this is a kind of project where I don't know if there are any in the Commonwealth, but in the Francophone world, we have funding associations for development that people working on these kinds of things in Africa, especially terminology, can apply to.
Yes.
That I know based here in Montreal. So anyways, you should not be shy about looking for funding, because I'm sure you would definitely be taken seriously and given money to do this kind of work. Thank you very much again, and good luck with your work, and good luck for the future.
Thank you very much.
All right. So now I suppose it's about the announcements. We've finished the three presentations. Sorry, very wonderful presentations, very rich, varied. And I am so delighted to have been part of all this. And I hope we can do this again in a couple of years. Thank you so very much. The announcements are going to be by Luke, or is there any, or by Sewunam, or? Hello?
Hello?
Yes, I was wondering, it says announcements, and I was wondering who that is by.
Okay.
Is it by Luke, or is it by Sewunam? Because we're basically done with the presentations for today.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, conference participants and all those who presented today. And thank you, Professor Paul Bandia, for moderating the session. So we'll continue tomorrow at the same time, 12:30 GMT. And we are hoping that you will be here with us again tomorrow. So just get all your questions ready. These are the things. Yes, I am.
Yeah, we're listening.
Okay, sorry. I was wondering whether I had unmuted my mic.
Okay.
Good. So this is the program we have for tomorrow. Two speakers, Dr. Sewanam Chachu and Pamela, actually. So there are three. And we'd also have a presentation from Kanja Suzanne van der Merwe, Stellenbosch University. And definitely their presentations are going to be very interesting. And we encourage all of you to be here with us again tomorrow at 12:30. Thank you very much. At this point, we may want to play some music. So those of you who'd like to stay to enjoy the music, you can do so. You can be taking your coffee or tea or whatever you'd like to take as we play the good music about Africa. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Good. I'm off to my breakfast.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.